All right. So, as I was saying, John Gottman offered for us the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. And these are negative communication styles, negative communication habits that predict the failure of relationships. So, the first one is criticism. Like I said on the last video when I was talking about picking your battles, should I criticize every single little thing? Or should I only, mention anything when it's actually something big and important? Criticism can really drive a person down. The person who's being criticized can start to feel as though they can't do anything right, that everything is a criticism. Here we have Lucy saying to Charlie Brown, and you're weak and spineless and wishy-washy. And then Linus says, she really took you apart, didn't she, Charlie Brown? And then Charlie Brown says, step by step, verse by verse, and line by line. And then Linus said, you sound like a victim of higher criticism. Lucy, if you've never read Charlie Brown, she is always criticizing Charlie Brown. A lot of times in relationships, partners start to fall into this sort of, why do you do that? You always do that. Why don't you care? Why don't you always, you never, criticism. And this can really break the recipient down and leave them with the impression that they can't do anything right. They may develop learned helplessness from being perpetually criticized. In the speaker, who is perpetually criticizing, sometimes you'll develop contempt for the person who you're speaking to. Here we have a kid who says there's nothing like a good sneer to dry up conversation. How's mine look? He's showing a sneer is contemptuous. Rolling your eyes. Oh, I can't roll my eyes apparently without doing another contemptuous thing, which is sighing. Right? These are signs that, honestly, you're ridiculous. You are exhausting. I don't even know what to say to you. Like that. That is not kind. And a lot of times a person who's been criticizing someone will move into that sense of contempt. That, it's sort of, we're in a hopeless situation because I keep telling you and you never seem to learn and you just don't care and stuff like that. So contempt can oftentimes be picked up by the actual words that the person is saying. You're stupid. Like, that's a pretty contemptuous thing to say. You're worthless. You're lazy. What are some other really choice things that people say? Those are contemptuous things to say. I do not hold you in high regard is for sure being conveyed in that. In fact, I'm not sure I hold you in even like meh regard. I'm thinking pretty badly about you when I use phrases like that. Also, we can pick it up from body posture and body language. These eye rolls and the, shrugging the shoulders when the person talks or, sort of dismissing them with these kinds of, denigrating body language. So contempt. Now, a person who's being criticized all the time may start to display defensiveness. And this person says, what's that funny look for? You think my girlfriend's an airhead, don't you? As he's holding a balloon with a face drawn on it. That tendency to want to defend yourself against a perceived attack is what we call defensiveness. Now, sometimes there's an actual attack going on. I've been criticizing you and you defend yourself against my criticism. Sometimes it's just being perceived as an attack. So if your partner says something like, I'm trying to think of something that could be ambiguous. So what do you want to do for dinner tonight? A person who's feeling defensive might say something like, well, since I always do the cooking, it would be really great if we could do something else, right? It's a little defensive. Why did you have to establish that you always do the cooking instead of just answering the question? Hey, I'd love to go out, right? But a person who's feeling defensive, they may be internalizing when you say, what do you want to do for dinner tonight? That what the hidden message is, well, I see there is no dinner prepared and I count on you are responsible for doing it. And so you have to defend yourself against that attack, even though that subtext was all in the recipient's head. So defensiveness is not necessarily a response to what was actually done or said. It's a response to maybe a lot of times a defensive person will say, well, it was in your tone, right? I always love that one. It was in your tone. All right. I don't know what that tone was or how I could have not had that tone, but I was not attacking you when I said what I said. Like, right? A lot of times that tone, your mom might have said that to you when you were a kid. Hey, don't you give me that tone. Like, okay. A person who is defensive oftentimes feels powerless in the situation. And so they have to like fight back in like a verbal way because they feel like there's nothing else they can do. A person who is tired of hearing it will stonewall. A person who maybe has had enough criticism or is picking up on your contempt or is feeling defensive may just decide to stonewall. And my cartoon says, actually, I failed to see where this is leading and I no longer wish to continue this conversation. They don't usually say it out loud. They usually just ignore. I've seen stonewallers who will just start talking over the person that they think is attacking them, and they'll just like, la la la, I can't hear you, and I'm not going to talk about this. You can say all the things you want, but I'm not going to listen, and I'm not going to look at you while I'm saying these things. I'm just going to look over here, and I'm going to say a bunch of words that no matter what you're saying, you know that I can't be hearing you because I'm busy filling the air so I can hear you. Did I do a good job of that? So they may literally like block the point that the other person's trying to make. There used to be a phrase back in the olden days, maybe you are familiar with it, talk to the hand because the face don't care. That's a stonewalling technique, right? Don't even bother saying anything to me because I'm not going to listen. So that's stonewalling. So these are our 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And when we see these kinds of communication warning signs present in people's relationships, it's a good predictor that this relationship is not doing well. It's a good predictor that these 2 people are not seeing eye to eye and that they're having significant problems. Here's some videos coming up in the playlist. This is John Gottman, and he's talking a little bit about the criticism and contempt, and then defensiveness and stonewalling. And he's talking about how they can predict that a marital relationship is on the track for divorce. So make sure you check out John Gottman and his discussion of that. So one thing that John Gottman pointed out in successful marriages, he was studying married couples. And in fact, that's what he focuses now in his private practice is on married couples. But one of the things that he noticed is that those who were still married 9 years after the study started versus those that got divorced in the interim years is that the successful couples showed fewer of the 4 horsemen, and they included more bids for positivity. So maybe so just to give you a little background, he assigned the participants in the study to face each other, and then there were cameras trained on each of them so that he could put them side by side on a screen and sort of watch them in real time. And then they were assigned to talk about something that had been sort of a point of contention in the previous 2 weeks. And, every married couple had something locked and loaded and ready to talk about. Some of them had been discussing it as they came in the building. So all of them had something to talk about. And so they would start the discussion. And he noticed that the couples who had the most of the 4 horsemen, he predicted that they were not likely to still be married over time. And he was 90% accurate in his predictions. Those who he said were likely on the trail for divorce, 90% of them ended up divorcing within the 9 years of the study. The ones who he felt the most optimistic about were, let me first mention that every couple argued. Every couple argued in this scenario. So not arguing is not the way to avoid divorce, that's for sure. But what he noticed is that those couples who were successful and still married 9 years later were the ones who, during the argument or during this conversation, they brought in positivity. They maybe shared a joke, or they said something self-deprecating. They sort of said, well, but I'm not very good at math, so of course I did have problems with that or whatever. Then they both kind of laugh, and then they would have this little bonding moment that made it like they would break the tension. They wouldn't keep escalating it and keep making it worse, like the couples who ended up getting divorced. So having a little sense of humor, having a little shared sense of humor, having a little bit of humility seemed to be really important for the successful marriages. Now this, what I'm going to show you on the screen now is the results of another study. And they actually asked married couples who had been married for at least 15 years, why are you still married to your spouse? The number one answer for both men and women was, my spouse is my best friend, followed by, I like my spouse as a person. So I would like to dispel the myth that a lot of people have that people who are married a long time are only still married because they're just sort of like stuck in it. They can't think of anything else to do. They feel like they have to be. The two number one and number two reasons for both men and women why they were still married after 15 years at least is because they like their spouse and their spouse is their best friend. Then they say marriage is a long-term commitment. And that's an important factor, that if they maybe have the waxing and waning of passion and intimacy and stuff, they always have that commitment there where they're like, okay, but I promise to be here. Marriage is sacred, right? Looking at it as something different than other arrangements and something that should be maintained makes it more likely that people will maintain it. We agree on aims and goals. Okay, so we're back to shared viewpoints about each other, right? My spouse has grown more interesting. That's a really fun one. I've been married more than 15 years, that's for sure, way more than that. And I have to say, I keep finding out new things about my beloved. It's like, well, how are you just now telling me this? It's somewhat just like very interesting to find these things out. I want the relationship to succeed. That's an important factor, right? Like sticking with it and wanting it is an important factor. Now the sexes start to disagree on what's important. Females said we laugh together. The males said an enduring marriage is important to social stability. They're not on the exact same page anymore. But we see, I'll just go ahead and populate these, what the choices were. They kind of start ranking them differently as we get to number 8. But, we have a lot of things on this list that are indicative of, liking each other, wanting to be with each other, wanting this to succeed, sharing goals and ambitions. Like these are important factors. And so, couples who share these kinds of, I would say a lot of these are intimacies, right? Knowing what your partner's goals are, wanting to find out more about your partner every year. These kinds of things, these are intimacies. And so having these shared intimacies are really important to long-term relationships. Now, I want you to think about like your longest friendship, somebody who who you've known the longest amount of time, and that you have maybe not always consistently been best friends and always doing things with each other, but the person who you've known the longest and that you haven't lost permanent touch with, that when maybe you're under stress, you think about maybe talking to them about it, something like that. So think about that friend and think about whether maybe some of these things kind of describe friendship relationships too, right? That when we're in an intimate relationship with a person, when we're sharing, whether it's liking love or it's, consummate love with a person, there's not a lot of difference, honestly, about what keeps relationships together. And then now I want you to think if you've ever had a job and maybe you stayed at a job for a really long time beyond when you thought you would. And maybe it was because of the relationships you were having there. And maybe you had some of these feelings about, well, I can't leave because we laugh together at work. Or, right, because a lot of times we stay with other kinds of commitments because of these relationship components. So I want to just re-emphasize that it's not always romantic relationships that we're talking about with love. It's a lot of different kinds of relationships. All right, I'm going to stop here and we will talk in the next video about how to build closeness.